The moment my sister saw my phone screen showing $18,147,382 account balance, she went completely pale and whispered, "What the hell is this?" But what my family said next made me realize that 24 years of being the family disappointment had actually been the best thing that ever happened to me. Let me tell you how the girl who was banned from family photos for having allergies became worth more than everyone in that room combined, and how they reacted when the truth came out. I'm talking lawsuits, harassment, family members showing up at my workplace demanding money, threats that would make your jaw drop, and a Thanksgiving dinner that ended with my 80-year-old grandmother calling me selfish while literally calculating her share of my wealth on a napkin. But here's the thing, by the end of the story, you'll understand why being the family scapegoat was actually the greatest gift they ever gave me. Before we dive into this incredible story, I need your help. This channel is brand new and I'm pouring countless hours into bringing you the most authentic real-life stories. These videos take me days to research and write properly, and I'm honestly nervous about putting myself out there like this. If you're already invested in this opening, hitting subscribe, giving this video a like, and dropping a comment would mean the world to me. It's completely free and helps me create more content like this. Your engagement really drives the algorithm to show these stories to people who need to hear them. I promise this story gets absolutely wild, so please stick around. Now, let me start from where it all began. My name is Helen, I'm 32, and I need to share this because what happened at Thanksgiving completely destroyed my relationship with my family forever, and honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. For context, my family always seemed pretty normal from the outside. My parents, Linda and Robert, have been married for 35 years. They live in this beautiful colonial house in suburban Detroit that's been in our family for generations. My sister Jessica is 8 years younger than me, and we're surrounded by a close extended family here in Michigan. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents who all live within a 20-minute drive of each other. From the outside, everyone always thought we were this tight-knit, loving family. You know the type. Big Sunday dinners, family vacations to the same lake house every summer, Christmas mornings with dozens of presents under a massive tree. My mom was always the one hosting neighborhood barbecues. My dad coached Little League for years. We looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. But here's what nobody saw. For the past decade, everyone believed I barely scraped by working at some small estate jewelry business. My family actually felt sorry for me. At every family gathering, I'd get these sympathetic looks and comments like, "Poor Helen, still trying to make it work with those old trinkets," or, "At least she's keeping busy with her little hobby." My grandmother would slip me 20s like I was still in college and struggling to buy groceries. Jessica would make these passive-aggressive comments about how she worried about my financial stability, how maybe I should consider going back to school or finding a real career. My parents would change the subject whenever anyone asked about my work, like they were embarrassed by their daughter, who played with old jewelry for a living. What they didn't know, what absolutely none of them knew, was that I had been living a complete double life for over a decade. But to understand how we got to that explosive Thanksgiving dinner, you need to know how this whole mess started. The problem started when I was 8 years old, and honestly, that's when my childhood effectively ended. That's when my sister Jessica was born 6 weeks early with severe asthma and what the doctors called a compromised immune system. I still remember that night like it was yesterday. I was sleeping over at my friend Sarah's house when my dad showed up at 2 a.m. looking completely panicked. He drove me home in complete silence, and when we walked into our house, it was like entering a different world. There were EMTs everywhere, oxygen machines beeping, and my mom was crying in a way I'd never seen before. Jessica was this tiny, fragile thing covered in tubes and wires, and suddenly our entire house transformed into this sterile medical environment practically overnight. Within a week, we had industrial-grade air purifiers running 247 in every room, making this constant humming noise that became the soundtrack of my childhood. My mom started cleaning with industrial-strength disinfectants multiple times a day. I'm talking hospital-grade stuff that burned your eyes and made everything smell like a doctor's office. Every surface was sanitized multiple times a day. The smell of bleach still makes me nauseous to this day, which is ironic since I now own a house worth more than my parents' mortgage. But here's where it gets really messed up, and this is the part that still makes me angry when I think about it. Anytime I showed even the slightest sign of illness, I was immediately banished to stay with relatives. And I mean any sign. A single sneeze during allergy season? Pack your bags. A mild cough from laughing too hard? Off to Aunt Catherine's house you go. A slightly runny nose from crying? You're obviously getting sick and need to be quarantined immediately. I remember the first major exile when I was 9. I caught what was honestly just a basic cold at school. You know, the kind every kid gets. Nothing serious, just some sniffles and a minor cough. But my parents acted like I was carrying the plague. They literally packed a suitcase for me and drove me to Aunt Catherine's house at 7 p.m. on a school night, like they couldn't risk me being in the same house as Jessica for even one more hour. At first, I actually thought it was kind of fun. Aunt Catherine made these amazing chocolate chip cookies and let me stay up late watching movies that my parents would never let me see. She had this huge collection of Nancy Drew books that I devoured, and she'd let me help her with her garden, which I loved. But after a while, you start to understand what's really happening. You're not going on fun adventures. You're being treated like a walking biological weapon. Like your very existence could damage your precious little sister. That's when the shift happened. I went from being their only child to being a threat that needed to be managed and contained. The favoritism only got worse as we got older, and I have so many examples that still make my stomach turn when I think about them. Let me give you just a few that really illustrate how completely twisted our family dynamic became. When I was 12, I placed second in the state science fair with this solar energy project I'd worked on for literally months. I had taught myself basic electrical engineering, built this whole miniature solar panel system, and created this detailed presentation about renewable energy. I was so incredibly proud of it. It was the first time I felt like I was really good at something important. The state ceremony was this huge deal held at the Capitol building in Lansing. All the families were there, kids in their best clothes, parents taking pictures. I remember looking out into the audience during my presentation, scanning for my parents' faces, feeling like finally, this was going to be my moment to shine. But guess what? My parents skipped it. Completely missed it. Want to know why? Because Jessica had what they called a breathing episode that turned out to be anxiety about a math test she had the next day. A math test. They chose her test anxiety over my state-level achievement. I had to get a ride home with my science teacher, Mr. Peterson, who kept apologizing for my parents' absence and telling me how proud he was of my work. Meanwhile, Jessica got ice cream and a movie night because she was stressed about her math test, a test she ended up getting a B+ on without even studying. But the real kicker? The very next week, Jessica made JV cheerleading. She was literally the only person who tried out. There was no competition, no skill required. She just had to show up. But you'd think she'd won the Olympics based on our family's reaction. We had this massive celebration dinner at her favorite restaurant. Extended family drove in from out of town. Someone even made a congratulations banner. I still remember sitting at that dinner listening to everyone toast Jessica's amazing achievement, while my second-place state science fair certificate sat forgotten in a drawer at home. Fast forward to when I was 15. I got the lead role in our school musical, Into the Woods, after months of rehearsals and callbacks. I was playing the baker's wife, which was this huge, demanding role that I'd been dreaming about since auditions started. I worked with a voice coach, memorized every single line and song, practiced my choreography until my feet bled in my character shoes. Opening night finally comes, and I can see my parents in the audience during the overture. I'm thinking, finally, this is my moment. They're going to see what I can do. I gave the performance of my life, hit every note, nailed every dramatic moment, got a standing ovation from half the audience. But halfway through the second act, I watched them get up and leave. Just left. While I was mid-song, pouring my heart out on stage, I watched my parents collect their coats and walk out of the theater. Want to know why? Jessica had called crying because she didn't understand her algebra homework. Algebra homework. My dad later said they had to support Jessica through her academic struggles because not everyone is as naturally smart as you, Helen. You know what happened the next week? Jessica had her piano recital where she played for Elise, and I'm being generous calling it played. She basically stumbled through it for 5 minutes, missing half the notes and losing the tempo completely. But the entire extended family drove 3 hours to attend. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was there cheering like she was performing at Carnegie Hall. They brought flowers, took professional photos, went out for a celebration dinner afterward. But the one that really broke something inside me, the moment I knew I would never be enough for them, was during my senior year. I had earned an academic scholarship worth $80,000 to the University of Wisconsin. Full ride, tuition, room, board, books, everything covered. I had a 4.0 GPA, was captain of the debate team, editor of the school newspaper, and had recommendation letters from 3 teachers calling me one of the most exceptional students they'd ever taught. I was over the moon. This was my ticket to freedom, my chance to prove that all those years of being overlooked had actually made me stronger and more determined. I thought surely this would be the achievement that finally made them proud. My family's response? That's nice, Helen, but how will Jessica cope without her big sister? Not congratulations. Not we're so proud of you. Just immediate concern for how my success would affect Jessica. That same month, literally the same month I got my full ride to Wisconsin, Jessica made varsity cheerleading. Now, don't get me wrong, making varsity is an accomplishment. But they threw her a surprise party with 40 guests. 40. I counted them. Catered food, professional photographer, the works. Meanwhile, my scholarship announcement got a brief, that's nice, and a suggestion that maybe I should consider staying local so Jessica wouldn't feel abandoned. Graduation day was supposed to be my vindication. I was salutatorian of my class with a 4.0 GPA, had been accepted to multiple universities with scholarship offers, and was finally feeling like maybe I could prove my worth to my family. I remember sitting there in my cap and gown during the ceremony, looking out at my family in the audience, thinking maybe now they'd see me differently. I gave the salutatorian speech to over 500 people about perseverance and following your dreams despite obstacles. I got a standing ovation. Teachers were hugging me afterward, telling me they'd never heard such an inspiring speech from a student. I felt like I was finally having my moment. But Jessica chose that exact moment to have what she called a crisis. She claimed she was having severe panic attacks about me leaving for college, that she couldn't handle the thought of being alone, that her mental health was deteriorating rapidly. Suddenly, instead of celebrating my achievements, my entire extended family was gathered in our living room discussing my selfishness and how I was abandoning my sister in her time of need. My aunts, uncles, and grandparents, people who had watched me be ignored for years, were suddenly experts on family loyalty and sibling responsibility. They wanted me to turn down Wisconsin and go to the local community college instead. Just for a year or 2, they said, until Jessica adjusts to high school and feels more secure. My grandmother actually said, Helen, you've always been so independent and strong. Jessica needs more support. Surely you can understand that family comes first. Family comes first. That was rich, coming from people who had made it clear for years that I came last in every family equation. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom listening to my parents and relatives discuss my responsibility to sacrifice my future for Jessica's comfort, something fundamental clicked inside me. I realized I would always come second in this family. Always. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I sacrificed, Jessica's needs would always outweigh my dreams. So I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I decided to stop asking for first place. I was going to Wisconsin, and I was going to build something they couldn't take away from me, something they couldn't diminish or overshadow. But I played it smart. I told them I was accepting Wisconsin as a backup plan while I figured things out and considered their suggestions about staying local. I let them think I was being responsible and considerate of Jessica's needs. Little did they know I was about to disappear from their narrative entirely and build an empire they couldn't even imagine. Moving to Madison in August 2010 was like breathing clean air for the first time in my life. No air purifiers humming constantly in the background, no constant cleaning with industrial disinfectants, no walking on eggshells around someone else's health issues. Just pure, beautiful freedom to exist without being treated like a contamination risk. My dorm room was this tiny space I shared with a girl named Maria from Chicago, but it felt like a palace because it was mine. I could sneeze without being exiled. I could get a cold without dramatic family meetings about quarantine protocols. I could focus on my own goals without constantly managing everyone else's emotional needs. Of course, my family made sure I felt guilty about this newfound freedom. The phone calls started immediately and never stopped. Jessica's mental health was supposedly deteriorating by the day. She was struggling without her big sister, having panic attacks about starting high school, and apparently my absence was causing severe separation anxiety that required therapy. My mom would call me crying about Jessica's condition, begging me to come home for weekend visits, suggesting maybe I'd made a mistake choosing such a distant school. My dad would get on the phone with these guilt-laden speeches about family responsibility and how Jessica has always looked up to you and she needs you now more than ever. The manipulation was relentless. They'd call during my study time, during social events, even during my classes when they knew I couldn't answer, just to leave long voicemails about how much Jessica was suffering without me. Thank God for Aunt Catherine. She was the only family member who saw through the manipulation and had the courage to call it out. She'd secretly send me care packages with little notes like, "Stay strong, kiddo, and you're doing exactly what you should be doing." Later, she told me she'd been watching this toxic dynamic for years and was just waiting for me to find the courage to break free. Catherine became my lifeline during those first few months. When the guilt calls got overwhelming, I'd call her and she'd remind me that it was normal for an 18-year-old to go to college, that Jessica's anxiety wasn't my responsibility to manage, and that my parents had created this unhealthy codependency themselves. Those first few months were emotionally brutal. I'd lie awake at night wondering if I really was being selfish, if Jessica really needed me as much as they claimed, if I was somehow failing as a sister and daughter. But then I'd remember all those years of being invisible, all those achievements that went unnoticed, all those times my needs came last, and I'd remind myself that it was time to focus on my potential instead of managing everyone else's feelings. For the first time in my life, I could succeed without someone else's crisis overshadowing it. And that feeling was intoxicating. Sophomore year, I got a work-study position at the university's Chazen Museum of Art. It was supposed to be basic administrative work, filing papers, organizing collections, answering phones, but I loved being around all the historical artifacts and getting paid to learn about art history and preservation. The museum had this incredible collection of donated pieces, everything from ancient pottery to contemporary sculptures. Most students found the work boring, but I was fascinated by the stories behind each piece, the techniques used to create them, and especially the challenge of determining authenticity and age. That's where I met Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who became my mentor and completely changed the trajectory of my life. She was this former Christie's appraiser who'd retired from the high-stakes auction world to teach and curate at university museums. Dr. Hoffman had this incredible eye for authenticity that I found absolutely mesmerizing. She could look at a piece for 30 seconds and tell you not just whether it was genuine, but when it was made, who probably made it, and what it was worth. One Tuesday afternoon, I was helping sort through a massive donation from an estate sale, boxes and boxes of what was supposed to be mostly costume jewelry headed for the museum gift shop. Most of it was pretty obvious fake stuff, plastic beads, painted metal, things with "Made in China" stickers still on them. But there was this one brooch buried in a box of clearance store jewelry that caught my attention. Something about it felt different. The weight was completely wrong for costume jewelry. It was substantially heavier than it should have been. The clasp mechanism was way too sophisticated for a reproduction, with these tiny, intricate details that would have been expensive to manufacture for a fake piece. I spent my entire lunch break that day in the museum library, researching hallmarks and makers' marks on jewelry databases. What I found made my heart race. The piece had characteristics that matched descriptions of authentic 1920s Art Deco brooches from a specific French jewelry house. When Dr. Hoffman came back from her meeting, I nervously approached her with my research. I was terrified she'd think I was overstepping or being presumptuous, but I couldn't stop thinking about that brooch. Dr. Hoffman, I said, I think we might have something significant in the donation pile. She looked up from her desk with interest. Show me what you found, Helen. I presented my research, the photographs I'd taken of the brooch, the comparative images I'd found online, the historical documentation about that particular jewelry house. Dr. Hoffman examined everything carefully, then looked at the piece under her magnifying glass for what felt like forever. Finally, she looked up at me with this amazing smile. Helen, you have an eye that can't be taught. Most people see what they expect to see, but you see what's actually there. This piece is absolutely authentic, and it's worth approximately $3,000. That moment changed everything for me. Dr. Hoffman started training me personally in authentication techniques, how to identify metalwork quality, stone cutting methods, age indicators, and all the tiny details that separate authentic pieces from reproductions. I became obsessed. I'd spend weekends in the library reading about jewelry history, gemology, and different manufacturing techniques throughout history. She taught me to use the museum's professional equipment, high-powered magnifiers, UV lights for detecting certain adhesives and treatments, digital scales precise to the tenth of a gram. I learned about hallmarks, maker's marks, and how different jewelry houses had distinctive techniques that were like fingerprints. The crazy part? My family thought this was just another one of my weird academic hobbies. When I'd call home excited about learning authentication techniques, they'd make polite conversation for about 2 minutes before changing the subject to Jessica's cheerleading or her latest drama with friends. Helen's really getting into that old jewelry stuff, they'd say to relatives. At least she's keeping busy with something she enjoys. If only they knew I was developing skills that would eventually make me richer than all of them combined. Junior year, Dr. Hoffman helped me get an internship at Heritage Auctions downtown Madison. It wasn't glamorous work. I was basically the lowest person on the totem pole, cataloging estates, helping with photography, and doing basic research for the real appraisers. But I was learning from some of the best authenticators in the Midwest and getting hands-on experience with pieces worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The auction house handled everything from small estate sales to major collections from wealthy families across the region. I'd spend hours studying how the senior appraisers worked, taking notes on their techniques, and asking questions during slow periods. That's when I had my first major find that really established my reputation. We were handling the estate of Margaret Whitmore, an elderly woman from Lake Forest who'd passed away with no children. Her family assumed her jewelry collection was mostly sentimental value pieces, things she'd collected over the years from department stores and travel. The collection filled 3 large boxes, and most of it was exactly what the family expected: costume pieces from the 1970s and 80s, souvenir jewelry from various trips, nothing particularly valuable. But buried in the 3rd box, wrapped in an old silk scarf, I found this Victorian necklace that everyone else had dismissed as a later reproduction. The setting looked like typical Victorian revival style from the 1940s or 50s, which would have made it moderately valuable but nothing special. But something about the stones bothered me. The cutting was slightly different from what you'd typically see in mid-century reproductions, and the metalwork had this particular patina that seemed too natural for a piece that was only 30 to 40 years old. I spent 3 days researching that necklace during my lunch breaks and after hours. I compared it to auction records, studied photographs of authentic Victorian pieces, and even found documentation of a similar necklace that had sold at Sotheby's in 1987. Finally, I was confident enough to approach my supervisor, James Mitchell, with my findings. James was this old-school appraiser who'd been in the business for 30 years and didn't suffer fools gladly. I was terrified to present my theory to him, but I couldn't let it go. Mr. Mitchell, I said, I think we might have misattributed the Whitmore necklace. I believe it's actually an authentic 1880s piece, not a 1940s reproduction. James looked skeptical but agreed to examine my research. After 2 hours with the piece under professional equipment, he confirmed what I'd suspected. It was genuine Victorian, circa 1882, worth approximately $45,000. The Whitmore family was shocked. What they thought was a $200 costume piece ended up being the most valuable item in the entire estate. James was impressed enough to start giving me more complex attribution projects, and word started spreading in the Milwaukee collector community about this young intern who could spot misattributed pieces. That success led to my first freelance job. A local antique dealer named Robertson had acquired a collection from an estate sale and wanted a second opinion on some pieces that seemed potentially undervalued. He paid me $500 to spend a weekend examining his inventory, more money than I'd ever made in a weekend in my life. I found 2 pieces in his collection that had been significantly undervalued: a 1920s Art Deco bracelet worth $8,000 and a pair of Edwardian earrings worth $3,500. Robert was so pleased with my work that he started referring other dealers to me, and suddenly I was getting small authentication jobs almost every weekend. The money wasn't life-changing yet, but it was enough to prove to myself that I had found something I was genuinely gifted at. More importantly, I had found something that was completely mine, something my family couldn't dismiss, overshadow, or take credit for. Back home during holiday visits, they were still making jokes about my jewelry phase and asking when I was going to focus on something more practical. Little did they know I was building the foundation of what would become a multi-million-dollar empire. If you're fascinated by Helen's hidden talent and want to see how she builds her secret empire, please smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with anyone who's ever been underestimated by their family. The transformation from invisible daughter to secret millionaire gets absolutely incredible. Your engagement helps these authentic stories reach people who really need to hear them. After graduation in May 2014, I made the biggest gamble of my life. Instead of getting a real job like my family expected, I used my savings, about $8,000 from freelance work and my part-time jobs, to start Midwest Heritage Appraisals from my tiny studio apartment in Madison. Those first 18 months were absolutely brutal, and I mean that literally. I'm talking ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week, sleeping on an air mattress because I couldn't afford a real bed, and lying awake at night wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. My entire apartment was smaller than my childhood bedroom, and half of it was taken up by authentication equipment I'd bought used from a dealer who was retiring. My parents would call asking how the jewelry thing was going, and I'd have to pretend everything was fine while I was literally counting quarters to do laundry at the laundromat. When they'd suggest I move back home and get a stable job, part of me was tempted. The uncertainty was terrifying. But I was determined to prove to myself that I could make this work. I spent every free hour building my reputation, taking any authentication job I could get, even if it only paid $50. I'd drive hours to examine a single piece for a collector, because every satisfied client was potentially 5 more referrals. The breakthrough came in November 2015 with a phone call that changed everything. A lawyer named Patricia Douglas called about an estate she was handling. The deceased woman, Eleanor Richter, had been married to a successful manufacturer in Milwaukee, and the family was preparing to sell her jewelry collection before putting the house on the market. The family had already had the collection appraised by a larger firm, which had valued it at approximately $85,000, a nice inheritance, but nothing spectacular. However, Mrs. Douglas mentioned that the family felt something was off about the appraisal. Eleanor had always talked about having very special pieces that had been passed down through 3 generations of her family. I drove to Milwaukee that weekend to examine the collection, expecting to maybe find 1 or 2 pieces that had been undervalued. What I found instead was authentication goldmine. The previous appraisers had clearly rushed through the job and missed several crucial details. What they'd cataloged as costume jewelry, various periods, total value $3,000, included a Cartier Art Deco bracelet from 1925 worth $35,000, a pair of Edwardian diamond earrings worth $28,000, and a Victorian mourning locket that was actually a rare example of a specific technique worth $15,000. I spent 2 weeks doing intensive research on that collection, barely sleeping, verifying every piece through multiple databases and auction records. When I presented my findings to the family, the total collection value was $387,000, more than 4 times the original appraisal. My authentication fee was 15% of the increased value, which came to $45,000. $45,000. More than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined, and enough to completely transform my business. That success changed everything. Word spread quickly in collector circles that there was this young appraiser in Madison who could find value that others missed. My phone started ringing constantly with clients who wanted me to examine collections that had been undervalued by other firms. By 2016, I was earning more in a month than most people make in a year. I moved into a proper office space, hired my first employee, a recent gemology graduate named Kevin who reminded me of myself at that age, and started building a reputation as the authenticator who could spot misattributed pieces that others missed. The irony of those early success years? When I'd visit home wearing authentic vintage jewelry worth tens of thousands of dollars, my family would compliment my cute costume pieces and ask where I'd found such nice reproductions. By 2018, maintaining the facade with my family had become almost like a performance art piece. They genuinely believed I was barely making ends meet as some kind of apprentice jewelry cleaner, struggling to pay rent on a tiny apartment and living paycheck to paycheck. Meanwhile, my company was handling approximately 60% of high-end estate jewelry authentication in the Midwest region. I had clients flying in from Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis specifically to have me examine their collections. My business was growing so fast I'd hired 3 additional employees and was considering opening a second location. During holiday visits, I'd sit in my childhood living room listening to Jessica complain about her $38,000 annual salary as a social media coordinator, talking about how stressed she was about student loan payments and credit card debt. The entire time, I'd be mentally calculating that I'd made more than her annual salary in my last authentication job alone, which took 3 days. She'd show off her latest designer purse, a Michael Kors bag that cost $200, talking about how she'd finally made it and could afford nice things. Meanwhile, I was wearing a vintage Cartier watch worth $18,000 that I'd bought as a business investment and wearing it to family dinners because I knew nobody would recognize it. The performance became second nature. I'd drive my 8-year-old Toyota Camry to family gatherings, a car I kept specifically for visiting home, while my actual daily driver was a BMW I'd bought with cash. I'd shop at Target when they were around, making a big show of checking prices and using coupons, all while having investment accounts worth more than my parents' house. During family conversations about money, I'd nod sympathetically when they talked about struggling with bills or putting off major purchases. I'd make comments about saving up for things like a new laptop or winter coat, while privately knowing that my quarterly dividend payments alone could cover their entire annual household expenses. But part of me genuinely enjoyed the deception. After years of fighting for their approval and never getting it, there was something deeply satisfying about succeeding wildly without needing their validation. I was proving to myself that I didn't need their recognition to build something incredible. I started playing little games with myself, like wearing authentic Harry Winston earrings to family dinners and seeing if anyone noticed. They never did. I'd bring expensive wine and claim it was a gift from a grateful client, watching them marvel at my generous customers while having no idea I was making more money than they could imagine. 3 years ago, in early 2021, I started hearing more frequently about my parents' financial stress. Dad's health insurance premiums had skyrocketed after his company downsized, and Mom's part-time job at the library barely covered the increased costs. They were talking about possibly downsizing the house they'd lived in for 25 years, moving somewhere smaller and cheaper. Despite everything, despite years of being ignored and overlooked, I couldn't just watch them struggle financially when I had the means to help them easily. So I developed what I thought was a foolproof plan to provide anonymous support. I set up automatic monthly transfers of $2,500 to their checking account, but I needed a cover story that wouldn't make them suspicious. I convinced Mom that Dad's company had implemented some kind of performance bonus program that he was too modest to brag about. Dad, bless him, played along perfectly when Mom asked about the mysterious extra money. "Oh, that," he'd say with a shrug. "Just some recognition at work. You know how they're always trying new incentive programs." The plan worked beautifully for about 6 months. My parents' financial stress disappeared, they stopped talking about downsizing, and they even started making small improvements to the house, new appliances, a fresh coat of paint, things they'd been putting off for years. But then Jessica's lifestyle started inflating dramatically, and that's when I realized my anonymous generosity was funding something I hadn't intended. Jessica suddenly had designer handbags, real ones, not the Target knockoffs she used to carry. She started taking expensive vacations and posting Instagram photos from resorts in Miami and California that cost more per night than she made in a week. Her apartment got a complete makeover with furniture that I knew cost thousands of dollars. When I'd ask my parents about Jessica's apparent financial success, they'd beam with pride about how responsible she'd become with money and how she was finally getting ahead in her career. What I later figured out was that my parents, feeling financially secure for the first time in years thanks to my anonymous support, had started giving Jessica substantial monthly help with her expenses. So essentially, I was funding Jessica's luxury lifestyle while she made sarcastic comments about my supposed financial struggles and career failures. The irony was almost too perfect to be angry about. Almost. Every family dinner became this surreal performance where I'd listen to them praise Jessica's financial responsibility and success, knowing that her designer lifestyle was being funded by my anonymous contributions, while she made little digs about my struggle to make ends meet. Jessica would show off her latest expensive purchase and make comments like, "I finally feel like I'm really building something for myself," while wearing shoes that cost more than I'd supposedly made in a month. The cognitive dissonance was absolutely insane. If you're hooked on finding out how Helen's family reacts to learning the truth about her secret wealth, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who's ever been the family scapegoat. Drop a comment too. I read every single one, and your engagement helps these carefully crafted real-life stories reach more people. You definitely won't want to miss how this explosive revelation unfolds. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving 2024, Jessica called me with what she described as the most exciting news of my life. She was engaged to Trevor, this guy she'd been dating for exactly 6 months. Now, Trevor is one of those guys who claims to be a crypto trader and entrepreneur, but as far as I could tell, he hadn't had an actual job in 8 months and spent most of his time posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn. But Jessica was over the moon, planning this elaborate wedding for next fall and talking about how they were going to have the wedding of the century. The very next day, my parents called with what they framed as a family request. "Helen, honey," my mom said in that tone she uses when she wants something, "we need to discuss Jessica's wedding. We want this to be really special for her, and we were hoping you might be able to contribute to help make her dreams come true." They were asking me to contribute $15,000 toward Jessica's dream wedding. $15,000. From someone they believed barely made above minimum wage and lived paycheck to paycheck. The math alone should have been impossible, but they seemed to genuinely believe I could somehow scrape together that kind of money. But Jessica's comment during that phone call is what really pushed me over the edge. I was on speakerphone and she said, "It's literally the least you can do, Helen, since you've never really contributed anything meaningful to this family. I mean, I've been emotionally supporting you for years while you figured out your career." Emotionally supporting me. While I had been secretly funding her designer lifestyle for 3 years through my anonymous payments to our parents. I'm sitting there in my home office, a room that cost more to furnish than Jessica makes in 6 months, listening to her talk about how I've never contributed anything meaningful to the family, and something inside me just snapped. That night, I made a decision that would change our family dynamic forever. I was tired of being their charity case. I was tired of funding Jessica's luxury lifestyle while being treated like the family disappointment. I was tired of hiding my success while they mocked my career and questioned my life choices. It was time for the truth to come out, and I decided this Thanksgiving would be the perfect opportunity. Thanksgiving 2024 was hosted at my parents' house, like always. The guest list included the usual suspects: my parents, Jessica and Trevor, both sets of grandparents, Aunt Catherine and Uncle Mike, my cousin Sarah and David with their kids, and a few family friends who'd become honorary relatives over the years. 18 people total, all crowded into my parents' colonial for what we called our traditional family gathering. I arrived around noon with a bottle of wine that cost $150, a 2018 Barolo that I'd been saving for a special occasion. When my dad asked about it, I casually mentioned that a client had given it to me as a thank you gift after a particularly successful authentication project. Wow, my mom said, examining the bottle, your clients certainly are generous. This looks expensive. Some of them are pretty happy when I help them discover value they didn't know they had, I replied, which was absolutely true. Everything was proceeding normally, the usual family chaos with kids running around, football games on TV, and my mom orchestrating meal preparation like a military operation. Jessica was showing off her engagement ring and talking about wedding plans while Trevor sat in the corner scrolling through his phone, probably checking his crypto investments. Around 3 p.m., my investment advisor called about a time-sensitive opportunity. One of my major clients was interested in selling a significant collection, and there was some urgency around the authentication timeline that could affect year-end tax implications. I needed to take the call to understand the scope and timeline. I stepped outside onto the back deck to handle the conversation, which lasted about 15 minutes. When I came back inside, the kitchen was crowded with people helping with final meal preparations, so I just plugged my phone into the charger on the counter and went to help carry dishes to the dining room. That was my crucial mistake. Jessica has always been curious about my mysterious work calls. She's made comments before about how I'm probably just trying to sound important when I'm really talking to some antique shop owner about inventory or cleaning supplies. She thinks my professional phone conversations are all an act to make my job seem more impressive than it actually is. So while I'm in the dining room helping set up the extra table for the kids, Jessica decides to satisfy her curiosity about what kind of important business her struggling sister is really conducting. She's standing right next to my phone when a text message lights up the screen. It was from Charles Schwab, portfolio summary, total value, $18,147,382. Monthly dividend, $127,450 deposited. Year-to-date return, plus 23.7%. I hear this weird choking sound from the kitchen and walk in to find Jessica staring at my phone with her hands shaking violently. She'd already taken a screenshot. I could see her camera app was still open. Jessica, I said, what's wrong? She looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, part shock, part disbelief, part something that might have been betrayal. What the hell is this? She whispered, holding up my phone. The kitchen went completely silent. My mom stopped stirring the gravy, my dad put down his carving knife, and even the kids seemed to sense that something major was happening. Everyone, Jessica called out, her voice cracking with emotion. Get in here right now. You need to see what Helen's been hiding from us. What happened next was like watching a nature documentary about feeding time at the zoo. 18 family members tried to cram into a kitchen designed for maybe 6 people, everyone trying to see my phone screen while Jessica held it up like evidence in a trial. Uncle Mike literally dropped his beer, and it shattered on the tile floor. Grandma Betty gasped so loudly I thought she might be having a heart attack. My cousin David started laughing, but it was that nervous laughter people do when they don't know how else to react to shocking news. Trevor, who'd been basically silent all day, suddenly perked up and said, "Wait, is that real?" Like, actually real. But Jessica was having a complete meltdown. "This has to be fake," she kept repeating. "This has to be some kind of mistake. She drives a freaking Camry. She shops at Goodwill. She lives in that tiny apartment. Actually, I lived in a 4,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage, but I'd never corrected their assumptions about my living situation." The silence that followed Jessica's outburst was deafening. You could hear my mom's antique grandfather clock ticking from the living room, the football game still playing in the background, and someone's stomach actually growling. Then the energy in the room completely shifted. I watched in real time as my family members' expressions changed from shock to something else entirely, calculation. I could literally see them doing math in their heads, figuring out what $18 million could mean for their own lives. My dad was the first to speak, and his tone was completely different from anything I'd ever heard from him before. "Helen, sweetheart," he said slowly, "I think we need to sit down and have a very serious family conversation. If you're as shocked by this discovery as Helen's family was, you're part of our incredible community of people who love authentic, jaw-dropping real-life stories. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone who's ever been underestimated by their family. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Helen's position. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. What happens next will absolutely blow your mind. What happened next was like watching a nature documentary about piranha feeding time. My family transformed from shocked relatives into financial advisors and estate planners overnight, and the speed of that transformation was honestly terrifying. My mom immediately went into full project management mode. $18 million? "Helen, honey, we need to sit down right now and discuss family responsibilities and obligations. There's so much good we could do with this kind of money." She actually pulled out a notepad from the kitchen drawer and started making lists. Lists of family needs, family debts, family dreams that could suddenly become reality with my money. My dad, who I'd never seen calculate anything more complex than a restaurant tip, suddenly became a financial strategist. "This changes our entire family's future," he said, pacing around the kitchen. "We could pay off everyone's mortgages, set up college funds for all the grandkids, maybe buy that lake house we've always talked about. Helen, this is an opportunity to really transform our family's legacy." But Jessica was something else entirely. Through her tears and apparent emotional breakdown, she managed to articulate a detailed financial plan for my money. "I've been emotionally supporting you for years," she sobbed. "I've worried about your career, I've tried to help you network, I've been there for you through all your struggles. I deserve at least $1 million to start fresh with Trevor. We could buy a house, pay off my student loans, maybe start the consulting business Trevor's been planning." Consulting business. Trevor's consulting business that consisted of posting cryptocurrency memes on Instagram. Then the extended family started chiming in with their own financial needs and helpful suggestions. My cousin Sarah mentioned her kids' college funds. Uncle Mike brought up his struggling small business that could really use an investor. Aunt Catherine, who had been my ally for years, suddenly started talking about how family money should stay in the family and benefit everyone. Even my 80-year-old grandmother got involved. She pulled out her phone and started calculating on the calculator app. If Helen gave each family unit just $500,000, she announced, there'd still be plenty left over for her own retirement. They literally began itemizing family expenses at the dining room table while the turkey got cold. Someone found a legal pad and started writing down dollar amounts next to family member names. It was like watching vultures organize a buffet. The most surreal part was that nobody, not a single person, asked how I'd built this wealth. Nobody said congratulations. Nobody expressed pride in my accomplishments or asked about my business. It was immediate, pure entitlement, like my success was something that belonged to all of them by virtue of shared DNA. I let them plan and calculate and itemize for about 15 minutes, just watching this display of family greed unfold in real time. I was honestly fascinated by how quickly people I'd known my entire life could transform into something unrecognizable. Finally, I stood up from where I'd been sitting silently at the kitchen counter. "Are you all finished?" I asked, and the room went completely quiet. "Because I have some things to say about your very generous plans for my money." Jessica started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "Jessica, you want to know how I built this? By being invisible in this family for 24 years. By learning that the only investment that mattered was investment in myself. By discovering that success comes from internal motivation, not external validation." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. You've all been living off my success for 3 years without knowing it. Those work bonuses Dad supposedly started getting in 2021, that was me. I've been depositing $2,500 every month into mom and dad's accounts since January 2021. The look of shock on my parents' faces was worth everything. You mean? My mom started. The comfortable retirement fund you think you've been building? The financial security that allowed you to help Jessica with her rent and car payments and designer lifestyle? That was all me. I showed them the transaction history on my phone. 3 years of transfers, totaling $97,500. Jessica, your Instagram-worthy lifestyle, your designer bags, your expensive vacations, all funded by my anonymous contributions that mom and dad passed along to you while you complained about my career choices. The room was dead silent except for Trevor, who whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath. So here's your choice, I continued. You can either accept that I've already given this family more than I owe, or you can lose me entirely. What followed was exactly what you'd expect from people whose financial fantasies had just been crushed. The room erupted into chaos. Jessica started crying again, this time about betrayal and family loyalty and how I'd deceived them all. My mom was demanding to know why I'd hidden my success and questioning what else I'd been lying about. My dad was asking about tax implications and whether this affected their Social Security benefits. But I was completely calm. I collected my purse and coat while they argued about trust funds and family obligations and moral responsibilities. "Helen, you cannot just walk out on your family," my mom called after me as I headed toward the front door. I turned back one last time. "I'm not walking out on my family," I said. "I'm walking away from people who see me as an ATM with legs." The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect from a family of people who'd just had their lottery fantasies crushed. Within 2 hours, my phone had over 200 text messages and missed calls. Demands for family meetings, accusations of selfishness, guilt trips about family loyalty, and increasingly desperate attempts at manipulation. Jessica posted a passive-aggressive Facebook rant about toxic wealth and family betrayal that got dozens of comments from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly having strong opinions about my moral character. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. My parents showed up at my office demanding a meeting. Family members I barely knew started calling with their own financial sob stories. Someone even contacted my business clients trying to verify my income, claiming they were concerned family members. After 3 months of harassment, I hired an attorney who sent cease and desist letters to 17 different family members. The legal threat finally got them to back off, but the damage to our relationships was irreversible. 6 months later, I have virtually no contact with my family. Jessica continues to post subtle social media digs about money and family values. My parents have apparently told everyone who'll listen that they never wanted my money anyway, and that they're praying for my spiritual salvation. But here's the thing. I'm at peace for the first time in my life. My business is thriving more than ever. I'm working with clients who appreciate my expertise instead of family members who see me as a resource to be managed. I've started dating someone who values my intelligence and ambition instead of seeing me as a potential financial solution. Being overlooked for all those years taught me to see my own worth, independent of their approval. Turns out, being the family disappointment was the best education I ever received. Thank you for following Helen's incredible journey from invisible daughter to self-made millionaire. This story proves that sometimes family disappointment is actually preparation for personal triumph. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone who's ever been the family scapegoat, and drop a comment with your own family drama stories. Your engagement means everything and helps me continue bringing these powerful, authentic real-life stories to light. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss it the next story. Sometimes the family that overlooks you is actually preparing you for the family you'll choose. Sometimes being the disappointment is the greatest gift you can receive because it teaches you that your worth isn't determined by other people's approval. If you're the invisible one in your family, the one whose achievements get overshadowed, the one who's always expected to sacrifice for everyone else, remember that your story isn't over. Your greatest chapter might just be beginning. Thanks for listening to mine, and remember, the best revenge is success they never saw coming.